Hey everyone, this is my first time posting, but I need to get this off my chest. I'm Max, 49, and until last night, I thought I had a pretty good life. Married for 22 years to my wife Camila, two amazing daughters who've both moved out and are building their own lives, and I've been grinding hard at work to make sure we're all set for the future. Yesterday, I closed the biggest deal of my career. This deal wasn't just about money, it was about security, comfort, and a promise to myself that I'd give my family everything I could. I was so excited to share the news with Camila. I even stopped by her favorite bakery to pick up a cake. The plan was to surprise her, pop a bottle of champagne, and just celebrate us. But when I pulled into our driveway, something felt off. There was an unfamiliar car parked there. At first, I thought maybe one of her friends had dropped by, or she was hosting one of her book club meetings. Still, it was late, around 10:30 p.m., so it didn't make much sense. I grabbed the cake and headed inside. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I called out for her, but there was no answer. I walked through the living room, noticed the lights were dimmed, and climbed the stairs. Our bedroom door was slightly open, and there was this faint sound, muffled laughter. My heart sank, but I still didn't want to believe the worst. I thought maybe I was jumping to conclusions, maybe. When I pushed the door open, I saw them. Camila, my wife of over 2 decades, in our bed, with some guy I didn't recognize. My brain couldn't process it. I froze, standing there like a statue. Camila turned and saw me. Her expression? It wasn't even shock, it was annoyance. Like I was the one interrupting her. She grabbed a blanket, covering herself, and started yelling at me, saying I should have knocked, accusing me of invading her privacy. Privacy? In our own home? I couldn't even get a word out. The guy just sat there, smirking, like he had every right to be there. I didn't blow up. I didn't scream. I didn't even know what to say. I just turned around, walked back downstairs, and left. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, staring at that stupid cake on the passenger seat. Everything I thought I knew about my life was gone in an instant. This is just the beginning, but I need to gather my thoughts. I feel like I'm unraveling, and I don't even know where to start. What would you do if you were in my shoes? After sitting in my car for what felt like forever, I finally drove to a park a few blocks away. I couldn't go back home, not after what I'd just seen. I sat there in the dark, the cake melting in its box, my mind racing. A million questions flooded my head. Was this the first time? Who was that guy? How long had this been going on? And how could Camila, my wife, my partner for 22 years, do this to me? I pulled out my phone, scrolling through our photos. There she was, smiling at our last anniversary dinner, laughing on a family vacation, her arm around me at one of the girls' graduations. It felt like all of it was a lie. My hand was trembling as I flipped through the pictures. It wasn't sadness I felt, not yet. It was rage. Pure, unfiltered rage. But I didn't act on it. I couldn't. My first thought was our daughters. How would I tell them? Should I tell them? They're both adults now, living their own lives, but this would shatter them. Our family had always been close, or so I thought. After a couple of hours, I started piecing together a plan. I'm not impulsive, never have been. I wasn't about to let my emotions dictate my next move. I needed proof, cold, hard proof. If this thing was bigger than one night, I had to know. I drove back home around 2 a.m. The unfamiliar car was gone, but I couldn't bring myself to go upstairs to our room. I slept, or tried to sleep, on the couch. At least, I lay there with my eyes closed, trying to stop the replay of what I'd seen. In the morning, I got up early and left before Camila came downstairs. I couldn't face her yet. Instead, I called my friend Dave, the only person I trusted completely. He's one of those straight-shooter types who tells it like it is, and I needed his clarity. When I told him what had happened, he didn't mince words. Max, you need to be smart about this. Don't let her manipulate the story. Get the facts, and protect yourself. This isn't just about your marriage, this is about your future. So, I did what I had to do. I called a private investigator. It felt surreal, something I never thought I'd do in a million years. The PI asked me a bunch of questions. Was Camila acting differently? Did I notice any changes in her behavior? The truth was, I hadn't. But now, every moment of the past few months felt suspicious. Her late-night meetings, her sudden interest in going to the gym, even her newfound obsession with her phone, all of it started clicking into place. The PI told me it would take some time to gather evidence. In the meantime, he advised me to stay calm, act normal, and not confront her. Easier said than done. When I got back home that evening, Camila was waiting for me in the kitchen. She was dressed casually, like it was just another day, and greeted me with a cold, "We need to talk." She started rambling about how last night wasn't what it looked like, that it was just a mistake, and she didn't mean for it to happen. Her tone was defensive, not apologetic, and she kept emphasizing how I overreacted by barging in. I stayed quiet, just watching her spin this web of lies. When she realized I wasn't going to say anything, she shifted gears. "You've been so distant lately, Max. Always working, always focused on your career. I've been lonely. What happened last night? It's not all my fault. You pushed me away." There it was. She was trying to blame me. I felt my blood boil, but I kept my cool. "So this is my fault?" I asked, my voice steady. She stammered, "I'm not saying that. I'm just saying we've both made mistakes." I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just nodded and said, "Okay." Her face twisted in confusion, but I didn't stick around to explain. I grabbed my keys and left. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. If she thinks she can talk her way out of this, she doesn't know me as well as she thinks. I'll get the truth, and when I do, she'll have to face the consequences. The day after that conversation with Camila, I forced myself to go to work. It felt like stepping into a different reality, pretending everything was fine when my life was unraveling. My coworkers congratulated me on the deal I'd closed, patting me on the back like I was some kind of hero. All I could do was fake a smile and mumble thanks. At lunch, Dave called to check in. "Any updates?" he asked. "Not yet. The PI says it'll take a week or two to get anything concrete," I replied. "In the meantime, I'm just floating, I guess. Stay strong, man. And remember, don't let her play you. This is chess, not checkers." Dave's words stuck with me. I needed to treat this like a strategy game. Every move had to count. When I got home, Camila was in the kitchen again, acting like nothing had happened. She'd cooked dinner, spaghetti and garlic bread, one of my favorites, and even poured me a glass of wine. "I thought we could talk," she said, her voice softer this time. I wasn't in the mood for games, but I knew I had to play along. "Sure," I said, sitting down at the table. She launched into what felt like a rehearsed speech. "Max, I've been thinking a lot about us, and I know I've made mistakes. But I love you, and I don't want to lose what we've built together. Can we work on this?" Her words sounded sincere, but her eyes betrayed her. There was something hollow in them, like she was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. "What exactly do you mean by work on this?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "Well, maybe we could try counseling," she suggested. "Talk to someone who can help us reconnect." I nodded slowly, pretending to consider it. "That's an idea," I said, keeping my cards close to my chest. "Let me think about it." Her relief was almost palpable. She smiled, reaching across the table to take my hand. "I'm glad you're willing to try." I didn't pull my hand away, but I didn't squeeze hers either. My mind was racing. Counseling? She wanted to talk about reconnecting, but she still hadn't given me a straight answer about what I'd walked in on. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I stayed up in the living room, scrolling through old texts between us. They were filled with little jokes, sweet messages, and plans for the future. It made me sick to think how easily she'd thrown it all away. Around midnight, I got an email from the PI. It was just a brief update. He'd started tracking Camila's movements and had set up surveillance. No significant findings yet, but he assured me he was making progress. I stared at the email for a long time, wondering how it had come to this, hiring someone to follow the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. The next morning, Camila was unusually affectionate. She made me breakfast, kissed me on the cheek before I left for work, and even texted me during the day. "Thinking about you," she wrote, followed by a heart emoji. It felt calculated, like she was trying to cover her tracks. And maybe she thought it was working. But I wasn't fooled. That evening, I got another email from the PI. This one was different. He'd found something, a name. The guy from my bedroom wasn't just some random fling. His name was Daniel, and he wasn't new in her life. According to the PI, Daniel and Camila had been meeting regularly for at least 3 months. 3 months. While I was working late, pushing through stressful negotiations to secure our future, she was sneaking around with this guy. The PI included a photo of them together, sitting at a cafe. She was laughing, her hand on his arm. She looked happy. I closed the email and sat in silence, the weight of it all crashing down on me. This wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a choice. A series of choices. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The next few days felt like walking through a fog. I kept replaying that photo in my head, Camila laughing with Daniel like they didn't have a care in the world. Every time I thought about it, my chest tightened, and my hands clenched into fists. But I kept it together. Camila continued her act, playing the doting wife. She cooked dinner every night, asked about my day, and even suggested we take a weekend trip together. It was almost laughable. I could see her trying to smooth things over, hoping I'd let it all slide. I decided to dig deeper. I needed to understand the full scope of this betrayal before making any decisions. I started going through our shared accounts and bills, looking for anything unusual. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There were hotel charges, multiple dinner reservations, and even a receipt for a jewelry store. The dates matched up with times when Camila had told me she was working late or out with her friends. I kept my poker face around her, but inside, I was seething. Every new discovery was like a knife twisting in my gut. The PI sent me another email a few days later. He'd followed Camila to a hotel downtown, where she met Daniel again. He included photos of them walking into the lobby together, holding hands. At that moment, something shifted in me. The anger was still there, but it was joined by a cold determination. I wasn't going to confront her yet. Not until I had everything I needed to protect myself. I called Dave that evening. "It's worse than I thought," I told him, filling him in on the latest findings. "You've got her dead to rights, Max," he said. "Now, what's your plan? Are you thinking divorce?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm not ready to make that call yet. But I need to make sure I come out of this with my dignity and my assets intact." "Good," Dave said. "And don't let her spin the narrative. You've got the evidence. Use it." The next day, I met with a lawyer. Sitting in that office, talking about dividing assets and custody, even though our daughters were grown, made everything feel so real. The lawyer was straightforward and professional, but she didn't sugarcoat anything. "If you have evidence of her infidelity, that'll help in negotiations," she said. "But it's not just about the legal side of things. You need to think about your emotional health, too. Are you prepared to walk away?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I need to be ready, just in case." That night, Camila came into the living room while I was watching TV. She sat down next to me, curling up like she used to when we first got married. "Max, I know I've hurt you," she said softly. "But I'm trying to make things right. Can't we just move on?" I turned to her, studying her face. She looked sincere, but I knew better now. "Move on from what, Camila?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. Her eyes flickered with something, fear maybe? Or guilt. "From everything," she said vaguely. "I just want us to be happy again." I nodded slowly, not giving her anything. "Happiness takes work," I said, my tone neutral. She smiled, relieved by what she thought was an olive branch. But in my mind, I was already planning my next move. The question wasn't whether I could trust her again. I knew I couldn't. The real question was how long I could keep playing this game before I was ready to make my exit. I stayed quiet for the next week, letting Camila believe she was making progress. It wasn't easy. Every time she smiled at me or touched my arm, I had to fight the urge to confront her with everything I knew. But I wasn't ready yet. I needed the timing to be perfect. The PI sent me another update. This time, he'd managed to record audio of a conversation between Camila and Daniel. In it, they talked openly about their relationship. Daniel joked about how easy it was for her to sneak away, and Camila laughed, saying, "Max is so busy with work, he doesn't even notice." Hearing those words hit me harder than I expected. She wasn't just betraying me, she was mocking me. It was like a slap in the face. But it also fueled my resolve. The next step was to secure my finances. I opened a separate bank account and began quietly transferring money into it. Not enough to raise suspicion, but enough to give me a safety net. I also made copies of all our important documents, bank statements, mortgage paperwork, insurance policies, and stored them in a secure location. One night, while Camila was in the shower, I checked her phone. It wasn't hard, she never changed her passcode. There were messages from Daniel, just as I suspected. They ranged from flirty to downright explicit. One message stood out. "Can't wait for our getaway next weekend. I booked the cabin." The cabin. My blood ran cold. She was planning to leave for a weekend with him while pretending everything was fine at home. The next day, I called the PI and told him about the cabin. "Follow them," I said. "Get everything you can." On Friday, Camila told me she had a work retreat and wouldn't be home until Sunday. I played along, kissing her on the cheek and wishing her a good trip. After she left, I sat in the quiet house, staring at the walls. This was it, the moment where everything was about to come crashing down. The PI didn't disappoint. He sent me photos and videos of Camila and Daniel at the cabin, looking every bit like a couple on a romantic getaway. They held hands, kissed, and even cooked together. The sight of her sitting on his lap, laughing like she didn't have a care in the world, was like a knife to the heart. When she came home on Sunday evening, she was all smiles, acting like nothing had happened. She even brought me a bottle of wine, saying it was a gift from her work retreat. "Thanks," I said, taking the bottle. "How was it?" "Good," she said, her tone casual. "We had some team-building exercises, but it was mostly just relaxing." I nodded, pretending to be impressed. "Sounds nice. You deserve it." She beamed, clearly convinced I had no idea what was really going on. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not this time. I spent the next few days finalizing my plan. The lawyer had everything she needed, and the PI had compiled a rock-solid case. I even wrote a letter to our daughters, explaining what had happened and why I was taking the steps I was about to take. By the end of the week, everything was in place. All that was left was to decide when and how to confront her. Part of me wanted to explode, to lay everything out in front of her and watch her squirm. But another part of me wanted to keep my dignity, to let her see that she couldn't break me. I wasn't sure which side would win out. But one thing was certain, the clock was ticking, and Camila's lies were about to catch up with her. The moment finally came on a quiet Thursday evening. Camila had just finished cleaning up after dinner, humming to herself like everything was perfect. I watched her from across the room, my heart pounding. This was it. "Camila," I said, keeping my voice calm, "can we talk?" She turned, surprised by my tone. "Of course," she said, drying her hands on a dish towel. She sat across from me at the dining table, her face a mixture of curiosity and concern. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I've been thinking a lot about us lately. About our marriage." Her expression softened. "I have too, Max. I know things have been rough, but I think we're on the right track." I nodded, letting her think she was in control. "Do you really believe that?" I asked. "Yes," she said, leaning forward. "I know I've made mistakes, but I love you, and I want us to move forward. I want to fix this." "Fix this?" I repeated, my voice calm but firm. "How exactly do you plan to fix it, Camila? By sneaking off to a cabin with Daniel? By lying to my face about a work retreat?" Her face went pale. She blinked, clearly stunned that I'd called her out. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "I know everything," I said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were photos, text messages, and receipts, everything the PI had gathered. "I've known for weeks." Her hands trembled as she opened the folder. The color drained from her face as she flipped through the evidence. "Max, I can explain," she began, but I cut her off. "Explain what? That you've been cheating on me for months? That you've lied to me every single day while I was out working to provide for us?" My voice rose, but I kept my composure. Tears welled up in her eyes. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Oh really? So, you weren't at a cabin with him last weekend? You didn't text him about how much you missed his touch? You didn't laugh about how clueless I was?" She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice barely audible. "A mistake?" I repeated, incredulous. "No, Camila. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. What you did is a betrayal, a calculated, deliberate betrayal." She started crying, covering her face with her hands. "I never wanted to hurt you," she sobbed. I was lonely, Max. You were always so busy with work, and I felt invisible. I stared at her, my anger boiling over. Lonely? Invisible? And your solution was to destroy our family? To throw away 22 years of marriage for what? For him. She didn't answer, just cried harder. I stood up, towering over her. I deserve better than this, Camila. Our daughters deserve better than this. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. No, Max, please, she begged. We can fix this. I'll end things with Daniel. I'll do whatever it takes. It's too late, I said coldly. You didn't just cheat on me. You disrespected me. You disrespected our marriage. And you disrespected the life we built together. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. Max, I'll change, she pleaded. I'll prove to you that I can be the wife you deserve. I shook my head. The time to prove that was before you chose to betray me. Her sobs grew louder as I walked away. I went upstairs, grabbed an overnight bag I'd already packed, and headed for the door. She followed me, begging me not to leave. Where are you going? She cried. To a hotel, I said, not looking back. I'll be back to talk about the logistics, but for now, I need space. As I stepped out the door, I felt a strange sense of relief. The worst was over, or so I thought. The storm had begun, and I wasn't sure where it would lead. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let her destroy me. Not now. Not ever. The hotel room was quiet, but my mind wasn't. Camila's pleas echoed in my ears, her tears trying to claw at my resolve. I'd spent 22 years with her, but I couldn't let that blind me to what she'd done. The next morning, I called the lawyer. I've confronted her, I said. It's time to move forward. Good, she replied. I'll start filing the paperwork. Have you told your daughters? That hit me like a brick. I hadn't. Not yet. They deserved to hear it from me, but I dreaded the conversation. I texted both of them, asking if we could talk over the weekend. Everything okay, Dad? One of them replied. Just some family stuff, I said. My hands shook as I hit send. Meanwhile, Camila flooded my phone with messages. I'm sorry. Please don't do this. Can we talk? I didn't respond. Let her sit with the truth for a while. I knew there was no turning back now. This was just the beginning of rebuilding my life. Without her on Saturday, I met my daughters at a coffee shop. They were all smiles when they walked in, but as soon as they saw my face, their expressions shifted. Dad, what's going on? Emily, my eldest, asked. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Your mom and I are separating, I said. There's been some issues in our marriage, and I can't ignore them anymore. They both stared at me, stunned. What kind of issues? Sophia, my youngest, pressed. I hesitated, then decided to be honest without giving all the ugly details. Your mom was unfaithful, I said quietly. I found out a few weeks ago. Emily's hand flew to her mouth, and Sophia's eyes welled up. Are you sure? Emily asked, her voice trembling. I am, I said firmly. And I want you to know this isn't your fault. This is between your mom and me. They sat in silence for a moment before Sophia whispered, I can't believe she'd do this to you. I'm so sorry, Dad, Emily added. I reached across the table, taking their hands. We'll get through this. I just need you both to know how much I love you. As hard as it was to tell them, I felt lighter after. Now they knew the truth, and I wouldn't have to face this storm alone. By Monday, Camila was in full damage control mode. She called the girls, claiming I'd overreacted and insisting we could still fix things. Emily called me that evening, her voice strained. Dad, Mom told us her side. She said it was a mistake and that you're rushing into this. She told you that? I asked, my anger simmering. Yeah, she replied. She said she feels awful and wants another chance. I stayed calm. Emily, I have evidence. This wasn't a one-time mistake, it's been months. I'm not rushing into anything. I've thought this through. She sighed. I just hate seeing our family fall apart. I know, sweetheart. But sometimes, things can't be repaired. After we hung up, I sat in silence, trying to steady myself. Camila wasn't just trying to save face, she was trying to rewrite the narrative. The next morning, I texted her, stop dragging the kids into this. We'll handle this as adults. without involving them further. Her reply came quickly. They deserve to know the full story. You're painting me as the villain. I didn't respond. Let her play her games. I'd already decided. This was about moving forward, not getting pulled into her drama. Camila's attempts to rewrite the story didn't stop. Over the next week, she continued calling the girls, painting herself as a victim of circumstances and claiming I was overreacting. It infuriated me, but I refused to let her see that. I focused on staying calm and keeping the truth clear for my daughters. One night, Emily and Sophia showed up at my hotel unannounced. I opened the door to see them standing there, concern etched across their faces. "We need to talk, Dad," Emily said. I let them in, and we sat at the small table in my room. Sophia started. "Mom's been calling us every day, saying you're not giving her a chance to fix this." Emily nodded. "She says she made a mistake and regrets it, but you're shutting her out." I sighed deeply, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Girls, I need you to listen to me carefully. Your mom isn't being completely honest with you." Sophia frowned. "What do you mean?" "This wasn't a one-time mistake," I said. "She's been seeing this other man for months. I have evidence, photos, messages, receipts. I've seen it all." Their expressions shifted from confusion to shock. Emily leaned forward. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" "Because I didn't want to burden you with all the details," I replied. "You're my daughters. You don't need to be caught in the middle of this mess. But I can't let your mom manipulate the truth, either." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "Why would she do this? After everything, why?" I shook my head, my own voice thick with emotion. "I don't have an answer for that, sophomore. I've been asking myself the same question every day." For a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Emily finally broke the silence. "I need to talk to her," she said firmly. "And I need the truth from her this time." "You deserve that," I said. "But please, don't let her drag you into her excuses. You know who she is. Deep down, you already know the truth." They stayed for a while longer, and we talked about everything: our family, their childhood memories, and how we'd move forward. By the time they left, I felt a small sense of relief. At least now they understood the gravity of what had happened. The next day, Camila called me. Her tone was sharp. "Why are you showing them evidence? Do you want to ruin their relationship with me?" "No," I said firmly. "I want them to know the truth. You're the one ruining their trust by lying to them." She scoffed. "You're doing this out of spite," Max admitted. I kept my composure. "I'm doing this to protect them from your manipulations. If you want to salvage your relationship with them, start by being honest." She hung up, furious. I sat there, staring at my phone. For years, I'd thought of Camila as my partner, my equal. But now it was clear, she was willing to burn every bridge to save herself. This wasn't just a fight for my marriage or my pride. It was a fight to keep my daughters anchored to the truth, no matter how messy it got. And I wasn't going to back down. A few days after that call with Camila, Emily and Sophia asked to meet again, this time at Sophia's apartment. I agreed, nervous but hopeful. When I arrived, Emily was pacing while Sophia sat curled up on the couch. It was clear something had happened. "Dad," Emily began, her tone serious, "we talked to Mom." I sat down, bracing myself. "And?" "She admitted it," Sophia said softly, her voice breaking. "She admitted there was someone else. But she's still saying it was only once. That it didn't mean anything." Emily crossed her arms, fuming. "She also said you're making this worse by dragging it out. That you're turning us against her." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. "I'm sorry you both have to deal with this," I said. "But the truth is, she's still lying to you. It wasn't just once, and it wasn't meaningless. I've seen proof." "Can you show us?" Emily asked, her eyes locking onto mine. I hesitated. I didn't want to be the one to pile on more pain, but they deserved to know the full story. "If you're sure," I said quietly. Emily nodded, and Sophia reluctantly agreed. I pulled out my phone, showing them the photos the PI had sent, the cabin trip, the cafe meetings, and the texts I'd found. Sophia gasped, tears streaming down her face. How could she lie like this? "She's scared," I said. "Scared of losing you both. But lying isn't going to fix this." Emily looked furious. "She's been making us feel guilty, Like we should be the ones fixing this family. And the whole time, she's the one who destroyed it. I didn't say anything, letting them process it. Sophia finally wiped her eyes. What happens now? I'm moving forward with the divorce, I said. But I need you to know this doesn't change how much I love you or how much I care about our family. We know, Dad, Emily said, her voice softening. And we're here for you. Hearing that was like a weight lifting off my chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. That evening, I got a text from Camila. The girls won't answer my calls. What did you tell them? I didn't reply. Let her sit with the silence for once. Later, Sophia texted me, saying, "We're staying with you, Dad. She needs to figure herself out." It wasn't what I'd wanted for our family, but it was the first step toward a future where the truth mattered more than appearances. The fallout from the girls' confrontation with Camila hit harder than I expected. By the next morning, she was relentless, bombarding me with texts and voicemails. "Max, I know you're behind this. The girls are shutting me out because of you. We need to talk. You're ruining this family. Do you really think they'll forgive you for turning them against their own mother?" I ignored every message. The old me might have been drawn into her guilt-tripping, but not anymore. I'd spent weeks playing nice, letting her spin her story. That was over. Later that day, Emily called. "Dad, Mom's losing it," she said. She showed up at my place this morning, unannounced. She was crying, saying she'd do anything to make things right. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "That it's not about what she says anymore, it's about what she's done," Emily replied. "I told her she needs to own up to everything and stop blaming you." "How did she take that?" "She got defensive," Emily said, her frustration clear. "Started saying you've always been distant, always more focused on work than on her." I sighed. That's her way of deflecting responsibility. "Don't let it get to you." "I won't," Emily promised. "But Dad, I don't think she's going to let this go easily." She was right. The next day, Camila showed up at the house unannounced while I was packing more of my things. Her eyes were puffy, her hair disheveled. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Max, we need to talk," she said, stepping inside before I could stop her. I set down the box I was holding. "Camila, this isn't the time." "When is the time?" she snapped, her voice rising. "You've already decided everything. You've turned the girls against me. What am I supposed to do?" "This isn't about me or the girls," I said, keeping my tone steady. "This is about the choices you made. You're the one who had an affair. You're the one who lied. And now, you're the one dealing with the consequences." Her face crumpled, and she sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she whispered. "That doesn't change the fact that it did," I said. "Camila, I loved you. I built a life with you. And you threw it all away. I can't fix this for you." She looked up, her eyes filled with desperation. "Max, please. Don't do this. Don't let it end like this." I shook my head. "It ended the moment you decided to be with him. I can't go back. And honestly, I don't think you can either." She sat there in silence as I picked up the box and walked past her. I didn't look back. That night, Emily texted me again. "Mom's trying to get us all together to talk. What should we do?" I replied, "Listen to her if you want. But don't let her manipulate you. You both deserve honesty, not excuses." Sophia added, "We're proud of you, Dad. You're doing the right thing." For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was enough. The next day, Emily and Sophia reluctantly agreed to meet with Camila. They told me it was only fair to give her a chance to speak, but they made it clear they weren't going to tolerate any more lies. When they got back to me that evening, the weight of the conversation was clear on their faces as we spoke over a video call. "She's still trying to spin it," Emily said, her frustration evident. She admitted to more than she had before, but she's still leaving out pieces and making excuses. Sophia chimed in, her voice quieter. She said she felt neglected, that you weren't emotionally available, and that she turned to Daniel because he made her feel seen. I clenched my jaw, taking a moment before responding. "And what do you think about that?" I asked. Sophia hesitated, glancing at Emily, who answered for them both. "We think it's crap, Dad. You've always been there for us, for her. You've worked hard, but it wasn't like you ignored her. And even if she felt that way, cheating wasn't the answer." Their words were a relief, but they also hurt. Hearing Camila try to pin her betrayal on me was like reopening an old wound. What else did she say? I asked, bracing myself. She started crying, Sophia said softly. She begged us to understand, said she wanted to fix things with you and with us. But what? I pressed. Emily leaned forward. It didn't feel real, Dad. It felt like she was crying because she got caught, not because she's sorry for what she did. She kept saying she loved us, but then she'd turn around and blame you or talk about how lonely she was. Sophia nodded. It felt more like she was trying to justify herself than apologize. I sighed, rubbing my temples. I'm sorry you both had to hear all that. It's not fair for you to be put in this position. We're not kids anymore, Dad, Emily said. We can handle it. But we want you to know that we're on your side. We see through her lies. Their support meant everything to me, but it also solidified my decision. There was no coming back from this. 2 days later, Camila sent me a long rambling email. She alternated between begging for forgiveness, blaming me for abandoning her emotionally, and insisting that she and Daniel were over. It was hard to read. Not because I believed her, but because it reminded me of the woman I thought I married, the woman who, for years, was my partner in everything. But this wasn't about nostalgia. It wasn't about what we used to have. It was about what she'd done and the irreversible damage it had caused. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, along with the PI's latest report. Camila and Daniel hadn't met again since the confrontation, but their text messages continued. In one, Daniel asked her, "Do you regret us?" Her reply, "I don't regret how you made me feel, but I regret what it's done to my family." That was the final nail in the coffin. She wasn't sorry for cheating, she was sorry for getting caught. The next morning, I called my lawyer. "File the papers," I said. "It's time." By the end of the day, Camila had been served. She called me immediately, her voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "You actually did it," she spat. "You're really going through with this?" "Yes, Camila. I am," I said calmly. "You're throwing away 22 years of marriage," she screamed. "No, Camila," I replied, my voice steady. "You did that the moment you chose him over us." She hung up, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of closure. The battle wasn't over, but the war had begun to turn in my favor. That evening, Emily and Sophia came to my hotel room with takeout. They didn't say much, just sat with me, eating quietly and watching TV. At one point, Emily looked over at me and said, "We're proud of you, Dad. You're doing what's best for yourself, and for us." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thanks, girls. That means more than you know." As we sat there together, I realized something important. My marriage might be over, but my family wasn't. Camila's choices had broken us in some ways, but in others, they'd brought us closer together. And that was something she could never take away from me. The days following the divorce filing were tense. Camila sent angry texts, alternating between blaming me and begging for another chance. I kept my replies short and focused on logistics. The emotional part of me had shut down. Emily and Sophia stayed supportive, checking in often and keeping their distance from Camila for now. "We need time to process everything," Emily had told her, and that seemed to set Camila off even more. One evening, Sophia called and asked, "What's next for you, Dad?" I paused, unsure how to answer. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'm taking it one day at a time. First, I want to make sure you both are okay." "We're okay," she said. "But you don't have to keep carrying us. Focus on yourself for once." Her words stuck with me. For years, I'd been the provider, the rock, the one holding it all together. It was time to figure out who I was outside of all that. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had permission to start thinking about a future without Camila, and it didn't feel as terrifying as I thought it would. The finality of the divorce filing didn't settle in right away. It took weeks of navigating awkward logistics, tense conversations, and legal procedures before the reality truly sank in. This chapter of my life was ending. Camila escalated her efforts to reach out to me and the girls. She sent letters, emails, and even tried showing up at Emily's apartment. Emily, ever the composed one, told her plainly, "Mom, we need space. Please respect that." Sophia, on the other hand, was more emotional. She avoided Camila altogether, telling me it was too painful to face her. As for me, I focused on putting one foot in front of the other. The lawyer had assured me that with the evidence I had, the divorce settlement would favor me. Still, it wasn't about winning. It was about closing the door on the life I thought I had and preparing for something new. One evening, as I packed the last of my things from the house, I found an old photo album tucked away in a drawer. It was filled with pictures from our early years, holidays, birthdays, candid moments when we were just a young couple in love. For a moment, I allowed myself to grieve. Not for the woman Camila had become, but for the life we once shared. I decided to leave the album behind. It wasn't mine to take anymore. When the divorce was finalized, it felt like both a loss and a relief. The lawyer's office called to confirm the paperwork was complete, and just like that, my marriage of 22 years was over. I took the rest of the day off work and went for a long drive, letting the quiet hum of the road fill the space where my thoughts used to race. That evening, Emily and Sophia came over. They brought pizza and insisted on a movie night. No heavy stuff, Sophia said, grinning for the first time in weeks. Just something silly. We laughed together over the ridiculous plot of some old comedy, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. The family I thought was shattered wasn't gone. It was just different. In the weeks that followed, I started taking small steps toward rebuilding. I joined a gym, something I'd been putting off for years. I reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in ages, and I even started therapy. The therapist didn't judge or rush me. She just listened, helping me untangle the mess of emotions I'd been carrying. One day, while walking through a park near my hotel, I ran into an old acquaintance from work, a woman named Grace. We'd worked on a project years ago and hadn't seen each other since. She smiled warmly, and we fell into an easy conversation. As we chatted, I realized how rare it felt to talk to someone without the weight of my recent past hanging over me. We exchanged numbers, and I walked away feeling something I hadn't felt in months: lightness. Camila continued to try reaching out, but her efforts grew less frequent as time passed. Eventually, she stopped altogether. I didn't hate her. I didn't have the energy for that anymore. I just felt nothing. Emily and Sophia, on the other hand, had started to rebuild their relationship with her, slowly and on their terms. I was proud of them for setting boundaries and protecting themselves. They deserved peace just as much as I did. One night, as I sat alone in my new apartment, I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger, it had all felt insurmountable at first. But here I was, still standing. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. And that was enough. I texted Emily and Sophia before bed, just to say goodnight and that I loved them. They both replied instantly, sending back hearts and "Love you too, Dad." For the first time in a long time, I fell asleep with a smile. It wasn't the life I planned, but it was a life worth living. And I was ready to embrace whatever came next.